All right, so welcome everybody back to Sigmar's Symposium, episode 5. The Warrior Philosopher, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing excellent. I'm currently residing in the tropics. Actually, I'm sailing on a commandeered destroyer. It actually belonged to the People's Republic of China, but I have stolen it and appropriated it for myself. And I'm collecting various strange people to help pirate it. And we're gonna go find some esoteric ruins and make millions of dollars by getting the treasure there. So life is good right now.
That's good to hear. I wish you the best for your pirate adventures.
Absolutely.
So, tonight we're going to be talking about your book called Promethean Dreams. It is going to be available for sale tomorrow. So, without any further preamble, the Warrior Philosopher, how would you describe Promethean Dreams in a nutshell?
So whenever I get asked this question, I always bring up these sort of aesthetic influences for the book, and right away the book takes place in a dystopian future. So it has that cyberpunk element, that kind of Blade Runner element. A lot of the images that I conjure up are a mixture of my own experiences in the big cities of the world, as well as this sort of Blade Runner future where everything's so compact and you're devoid of nature and devoid of pure air. You're just stuck in this urban jungle. So it's sort of this futuristic dystopian society. Um, and I would describe it as a young man's journey in modernity and dealing with all the vices of modernity and overcoming it nonetheless. See, people think of dystopian futures as this desolate, post-apocalyptic. There's nothing good, but in reality, our dystopian future is more likely to be something where it is extremely comfortable, where pleasures rest at every corner, where every one of your needs is satisfied. But the reality is that this is far more dystopian than a post-apocalyptic world. In the post-apocalyptic world, where you fight and struggle for survival, you have meaning and purpose in life. It's imbued in life. But in a future where everything is sort of reduced to the petty material, which is the case in my book, it's actually worse because you don't live for anything anymore. And I think in large part, I wrote it as a sort of one prediction for the current world. We already see a lot of this with pornography, with and not just pornography, but video games. And look, I'm not one to say don't play video games, but these soy jacks living in their parents' basement, getting fat, doing that all day, living their entire life in a simulation, right? This is a big part of the book, is the idea of simulations. Video games are a simulation. It's somebody who can't go out into the world and actually conquer, so they must conquer in the virtual. So a lot of this is just this sort of voyeurism of modernity. Everybody is a spectator, right? And when they are they're just doing it in this virtual world. Few people are out there getting after it in the real world. So this is the story of a young man who is trapped in this paradigm. He's trapped with all these vices and all these comforts, and he nevertheless must find a way to overcome it. And this is the story of that overcoming of modernity, essentially. And it's not so much some people might read this and sort of read it as like a Ted Kaczynski critique of technology. And, it's not so much a critique of technology, but critique of this downwards use of technology. I think, throughout human history, you have good uses of technology when it's martial, right? You create some great weapons so that you can defeat your enemies and conquer and expand your will to power. But most technology in the modern age is created to make life more comfortable, to give you more pleasures. And this is what I'm sort of critiquing, and I'm critiquing this. I would call it leftist, really. The leftist orientation of using technology is to make life more comfortable. This is what the leftist wants. They want you to be this long-housed, amalgamated, weak little submissive being. And this book is critiquing that. It's critiquing comfort, critiquing pleasure, and saying, well, actually, the greatest life is where you have the highest highs and the lowest lows. If you want to experience true euphoria, you do have to suffer. And if your life does not have suffering in it, if it does not have pain in it, which is the case for a lot of people in modernity, especially in the developed West, that you must seek pain, and that's the only way you'll find meaning. So that's sort of a long-winded answer to that question.
I think that's a pretty good summary. So it was really nice to read fiction for once. Books I read are nonfiction, and I'm autistically taking details in the margins and shit. But it was really refreshing to kind of be able to just sit back and actually enjoy a book for once. I picked up on the cyberpunk theme. I have that in my notes here. It seems like it's kind of a combination between Blade Runner, like you said, Cyberpunk 2027, I mean 2077, and then a little bit of A Brave New World as well. So the city which this story takes place in, obviously it's a setting, but it also kind of functions as a character in its own right. So
Yes.
what kind of made you create this dystopian city in your book?
Yeah. So the idea of a machine that is functioning beyond the biological was sort of the idea behind it. The city is as much a part of the machine as the machine's a part of the city. It's almost this entity. And I think when we think of modernity and we think of the possibilities of technology, one of these sort of Heideggerian critiques is that technology is running a course of its own in which man will no longer be at the driver's seat wheel of technological process, and he'll eventually be driven by technology. This is also the position largely of Nick Land. So I guess what I'm trying to illustrate with that is it's this sort of future where artificial intelligence evolves to the point where humans are detached from their own destiny, and it's almost as if the machine, right, the artificial intelligence, takes hold of all aspects of human life, which is sort of the idea of the city. The city is it's essentially Las Vegas on steroids. For those of you that have ever done some degeneracy and seen a casino before, it's exactly that. It's all these technological little things that are orchestrated and constructed to lure you in. The whole point of a casino, with the specific lights, the specific sounds, it's supposed to trick your brain into feeling comfortable. It's literally like the Odyssey and the Lotus Eaters, right? It's literally a lotus flower. That's sort of all these different technological things that grant us pleasure or cheap dopamine. So the city is an entity in that it's a part of the machine, and the machine is part of the city. It's become this sort of blob which hovers like a dark cloud over humanity, and cheapens our lives, weakens us, numbs us. And without spoiling the book too much, I mean, when you think of life without pain, life without suffering, what is the point, right? And if you want to get rid of all suffering, you want to get rid of all pain, which is sort of this Marxist communist point of view, then really the only solution is to end life entirely, which is why communism is a cult of death, why the left is a cult of death. Why do they promote, things like abortion so greatly? Why do they want the West to stop having children, right? And the reason is precisely because they're a cult of death. They want to end life, right? So that's sort of the leftist orientation, and I imbue that into the machine. The machine, if the machine sees, pain and suffering as these bad things, then, why not just get rid of all of it entirely by getting rid of all life entirely? That's essentially the process of the machine creating all these false and illusory centers for people to lose themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that does make sense. I should note for people who want to read the book, we're not going to discuss spoilers for about the first 30 minutes of this podcast. We'll get into some plot points later, but I'll be sure to remind everyone when we do that. So if you want to read the book, then you can tune out and it won't be spoiled for you. But I think you really touched on some things in that response. The city, for instance, when he goes to the clubs and when he sees particularly how the women act in this city, you can just tell that it's very degenerate. The word I used in my notes over and over again is corruption. There's this sort of halo effect of corruption that the city has on people. And we'll touch more on this subject when we mention the character of Alice later. So, what inspired the characters in this novel?
So I think, obviously, at some element of all art is a reflection of ourselves. And though I've been blessed in my life to have vitality most of the time, I still have very much, been caught in those same sort of traps, right? As young man or as young men, I think all of us are not taught to. I mean, we're sort of taught to be this new kind of man, which is not a good man. Leftist ideology. The perfect example, Sigmar. If you've probably, when you're following the election, you sort of saw the kind of person Tim Walz was painted out to be, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, like this sort of, almost like a mascot, right? Oh, he's always smiling, he's always, jolly, but he defers to the authority of Kamala Harris in this case, right? He's not really meant to lead. He's meant as a sideshow. He's meant as this sort of supportive, side character. And I think in large part, a lot of men today are encouraged to be that rather than to be strivers and to be people that seek. Instead, we're sort of brainwashed into being supporting characters. And a lot of obviously I think the manosphere is cringe because I think that a lot of it is from resentment. But there is a point when they talk about things like, I don't like using their terminology, but like hoflation, for example. It's just a cringe sounding word, but I don't know what else to call it. Things like that, where the value of women, for instance, are put on a pedestal, and where men are sort of subversively told, well, actually, you should settle for the single mother of four. You should settle for this woman who has been promiscuous her whole life. You should support her. Blah blah blah. It creates a weak man who's essentially giving in to these cheap pleasures, these cheap desires, and the reason I use that as an example is because I think that psychology, it's all tied into all these other things. For example, whether it be pornography or being stuck playing video games the whole time. We're not taught to be conquerors. We're not taught to be strivers. We're not taught to seek. We're sort of taught to just accept what life throws at us and be supportive for those things that it throws at us. So what inspired these characters is the main character is almost precisely that, right? He's stuck in this sort of place where he's going to these simulations, and the book doesn't really go into that too much specifically, like his past life. It sort of starts at the point where he's going to seek to overcome these vices, but in general, right, he's like everybody else. He's addicted to these sim sites. He's addicted to the synthetic drugs that have been constructed in this or invented in this new age. He's addicted to love bots, which is sort of my prediction of what might happen if these sex robot things sort of become popularized, right? I forget who it was specifically. It might have been Heidegger, actually, that essentially said that humans are just going to have sex with robots at one point. It might have been somebody else. I could be wrong, but I think it might have been Heidegger. Essentially, this point where pleasure is just so cheap and so much merely a sort of chemical process rather than a spiritual one, to the point where people are just addicted to the chemical process. And of course, the main character is stuck in that. And like I said, I've been blessed in my life where, at a young age, I did mixed martial arts. I joined the military. Now I'm getting into bodybuilding a little bit. It's all these things that have allowed me to live life richly and deliciously. But like any man, of course, I've seen the other side of things. I've seen the side of things where you feel powerless and you feel stuck in this great machine that hovers all these temptations at you, all these corruptions. So for there's a bit of me in the main character. I would say that I've never been like a loser like the main character was at first, to that degree. Of course, I've had moments where I perhaps was not as great as I ought to have been, but he's sort of an exaggerated, well, what's the worst that I could be if society was much worse than it is now? Because of course, many of us could have been in the main character's position. So of course, there's a little bit of me in the main character, but primarily his specific transformation was highly actually inspired by Yukio Mishima's, right? Because Mishima's transformation is from this frail, skinny person who feels that he cannot change the world around him. This is what he talks about in Sun and Seal. He talks about writing as a method of escape, writing as a method of being able to influence fake and false worlds because he cannot influence the world he is in. And of course, as he receives or, cultivates physical vitality and health and whatnot, he is able to influence the world around him. So the journey of the main character is also heavily influenced by Yuko Mishima. In terms of the women in the book, various observations, various dealings with women. Obviously, a character like Alice is this pure archetype, and then some of the other, just the random women, for example, are sort of this archetype of the sort of mindless woman who's trapped in this corrupt paradigm of modernity, trapped in the pleasures, and of course the male characters as well, trapped in all these pleasures and corruptions. But then, of course, there's good male characters as well, who the main character finds that also sort of reject the degeneracy of this sort of postmodern world that I've created, this dystopian world. And I'd say there's a little bit of my friends in those characters too. People who also see the Matrix for what it is. I hate Andrew Tate for ruining the Matrix analogy, because it used to be such a cool analogy, and then he just ruined it. But that's what modern world essentially is. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes that has a specific purpose of numbing us, of narcotizing us. That's what Nietzsche talks about, the narcotization of the soul. And that's largely what you see in the book. It is this sort of matrix, let's say, and that there's people that want to break out of it. Well, how do they break out of it when it's, where all the bad things are just surrounding you, and they're so tempting and they're so addicting, like they're chemically constructed to be as addicting as possible. But to sort of summarize that, large part, there's myself in the main character. Mishima definitely inspires him a lot. Even like the narrator from Fight Club to a large extent, and many other books. And then, of course, my friends, and then just people I've dealt with throughout the years. It's a little bit of a long answer, but
yeah, that's fine, brother. There are a lot of themes to touch on there, and I do want to talk about stuff like heroism, vitalism, the corruption of the city, and how nihilistic the narrator was at first. But before we get into that, since that'll likely involve some spoilers, I want to ask you, why did you decide to write this book? Because when I was reading it, first off, you don't give the main character a name.
Yes.
So it's very easy to envision yourself as the reader, as this main character. And it really seems like a sort of roadmap for someone who's living in modernity, particularly if you're living in the city with all of the degeneracy in American cities. And it's giving you sort of some advice about how you can go about navigating life in this dystopian world that we live in. So is that kind of the reason you decided to write this book, or is there something else that made you want to write it?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, largely when I create things, there's an aesthetic vision, and I don't really think about the intrinsic motivations behind them. But I have this aesthetic vision, and it's sort of, when you have this sort of Jungian dream psychology, you're given dreams and you see the picture of the dream, but you don't necessarily know why you've been given the dream. If you take the dream like a painting and you paint it across and you paint this thing, there's obviously sort of underpinning motivations behind it. And absolutely what you mentioned is absolutely an underpinning motivation. But when I first started writing it, I was really just following an aesthetic vision I had in my mind. And I'm serious when I say this, I spent probably like 6 months playing with this idea, playing with the first page, because I didn't really have an idea of how I wanted to write the book. But I played around with that beginning, this idea of this guy going through the city, smoking a cigarette, right? The different smells, the different sounds, because it's something I had lived through 100 times throughout my life, walking downtown, especially by yourself, right? That's when you really get to thinking. I'm walking downtown, I'm smoking a cigarette, or I'm smoking a cigar. And I just thought there's something powerful about that image of being alone, smoking a cigarette, seeing the modern world for what it is. And I just wrote that one page. Actually, it wasn't the first page in Promethean Dreams, but it was the page where he's walking through the city. That was the first page initially. And I just sort of wrote that a bunch of times over and over and over again until I finally decided to actually write the book. So I had this aesthetic vision of what modernity was. And as I was writing it, I just kind of was inspired by the struggles that I believe young men deal with the struggles that I think all people really deal with, and why those exist. And when you take things to their extremes, which is what I did in the book, when you take things to their extremes, you really see the existential threat that the current vices in our society have. You take pornography, for instance, right? And you think, well, what could happen if this virtual reality pornography shit gets so realistic that it feels just like the real thing? Then people might just get hooked on that. Why would a guy go and meet a nice woman, meet a beautiful woman in real life, when that takes effort and that takes potential rejection and embarrassment, if he could just hook up, a VR set and get just as good of a thing chemically? And that's a very real fear I have for young men and society as a whole. So I just sort of painted all these different things that, I sort of felt inside into an aesthetic vision, which was the book itself and the story and whatnot. And then that's just sort of how it came about. I didn't really have a super intention, like a super clear intention, but I did have this general storyline, and I wanted there to be a mystical element to it. And I've always been fascinated by the figure of Prometheus, because he sort of represents this revolt of man against essentially against darkness. If you think of the Plato's cave analogy, right? People don't want to leave the cave. They want to stay in the cave. And this is sort of an overused cliche, but it's true. People don't want to know life for what it is. If they're comfortable, whatever, they don't want to leave their homes. They want to stay in the warmth. They want to stay in the comfort. And Prometheus is this figure of fire, of living and breathing fire. And he gives you the fire to grant you the ability to dictate your own destiny. If you are stuck in the cave, you do not dictate your own destiny. You stay hidden away. You stay away from the game. You're a voyeur. You watch life happen around you, but you don't engage in it. And we're all like, modern life turns you into a spiritual cuck. You're not out there playing sports anymore. You're watching professional sports. And look, I'm not saying you should never watch professional sports, but if that's all you do all day and you're just this fat, lazy guy drinking, Coors Lights all day, watching sports, and you're not doing shit. And for example, you take more pride in your football team winning a game than you do your country winning a war, then something is very wrong. Because these instincts of combat, of tribalism, get condensed into this petty material form. And so, yeah, like it's just all these different things that weren't necessarily clear to me, but like a dream, right? When I mentioned the Jungian dream analysis, like a dream, it's given to you and you don't really know why at first, but as you sort of, let's say you write the dream in your dream journal, or you paint a picture of the dream, it starts to reveal to you what you meant, or what you were inspired by, or what was the spiritual force that was sort of pulling you. And I think, yeah, that's sort of my view on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess now we'll start to transition into some spoiler territory, so we can discuss these themes, but do so while relating them back to the plot. So there's no better place to start with this book than at the beginning. And in the beginning of the book, the narrator is constantly getting high. He's smoking. He's physically unfit. And there was one passage that really struck out to me. He was describing how he was searching for his hidden stash of narcotics, and how whenever you're focused on getting high, that's all you can think about. And I think we should linger on how bad of a state the narrator was in at the beginning of the book, because he really seems to embody the sort of masked man that Ebola talks about. I think Dostoevsky would call this the underground man. And simply put, the narrator is not the Giga Chad that he would become. So what are your thoughts on the narrator at the beginning of the book?
Yeah, so like I said, there's lots of different influences for the narrator. Some of it is observation. Some of it is little sprinkles of my own life exaggerated. Some of it is mishma, different stories. Ultimately, you always I think that the story of transformation is important. The sort of I think message behind a lot of Nietzschean philosophy is this idea of becoming. You're never this perfect, polished, pure rock. You're in a constant state of sharpening the steel, which is your body and your life and your spiritual content. You're never going to be perfect, essentially, and life is becoming Titanic. It's becoming great. It's becoming the Giga Chad, right? But your journey's never over. So I really wanted to get into the weeds of being at your lowest low, and how do you pull yourself out of, the abyss, out of the pit. So, when I think of the main character at the beginning, I think of, I took all my angriest moments at life, the moments where I was not glorious, let's say, the moments where I was not dictating my life, and sort of external forces were dictating my direction. And I thought of powerlessness. And like I said, a lot of it's exaggerated. And I've been lucky enough in my life where I haven't been in those positions often. But I took the anger and resentment that I have felt, and that I know I could feel more of in certain circumstances, and I sort of projected that into the character. This is the whole idea of ressentiment. When you do not have something, that is good, and you feel you cannot attain it, then you try to convince yourself that it's actually not a good thing. You try to hate it because you're envious of it. This is the general concept of the slave, right? If you cannot be the master, you will say that being the master is actually a bad thing. And that's the main character, right? When he says, he declared war on beauty because he himself was not beautiful. So the main character is in this basically the lowest that you can get. But the whole point was to put him in the position of the lowest so that you could see that transformation is possible and is necessary, that we must live up to these sort of hidden destinies and hidden prophecies that are spoken in the wind, and transform, essentially,
Yeah, I think this segues us nicely into another theme I really wanted to talk about, and that being beauty and purity. So the narrator really wants to be beautiful in the beginning of the book when he's not. And whenever he gets beaten up or he gets in that fight outside of the nightclub, that sort of kicks him into gear, and he starts going out. He starts to train. He'll eventually meet Carter and Trent at that gym. And he wants to be beautiful because I think beauty is the reason life is worth living.
Yes.
Beauty is a component of morality. For something to be good, it should be beautiful. And relating this to the topic of purity, whenever beauty is defiled, that is the most disgusting and perverse thing that can happen. So specifically, we can look at the women in this book. The women who go to the clubs, they could be very beautiful. They could have very beautiful bodies physically, but the fact that they engage in all of these degenerate activities in the club is just very disgusting, and it ruins the woman's beauty. She may be physically attractive still, but it's sort of, there's a tainting effect, and that's like defilement. That's the desecration of beauty. And I think that's why the character of Alice stands out so much, because she has never been defiled. She's been sheltered away from the corruption of the city. And because of that, she's not only physically beautiful, but she's also spiritually and morally beautiful. So what do you think of that and the topic of beauty, the theme of beauty in the book?
Yeah. And, part of what I was trying to illustrate in the book as well is the sort of two sides of beauty. To have the Alice, you need the main character. You need men, essentially, right? And, something like Bap talks about, for instance, is that a woman in her natural state, uncorrupted by modernity, is honestly, one of the most steadfast, loyal, and ultimately noble. They're all those things, right? In their natural state, when nature is at a good balance, right? But to have that, you need men. You cannot have pure women without men who know intimately violence, who know intimately darkness. Because look, you can't ever live in a utopia. No utopia ever has existed in humanity. Whenever you have your little farm utopia, what happens? The steppe, tribesmen or whatever, the Yamnaya come in and they overrun, Longhouse matriarchal Europe. And of course, that gives rise to a new European breed. You need darkness in men. You need this sort of relationship with violence. And I think what I was trying to illustrate there is that the only way to have purity of like, especially of women, right? Someone like Alice, she's good. She's good inside, and she's good inside because she has someone like the main character who can stare at the abyss and understands darkness, but to because he understands darkness, he can also fight it. So the two sides of beauty are this purity, but also this sort of darkness. And what's interesting about this sort of paradigm is that in a lot of ways, the main character in a lot of ways is more beautiful than Alice. Alice is, but in a different way. And of course, in other ways, Alice is more beautiful than the main character. But their beauty it's essentially the elegance and brutality you get in Mishima's philosophy, right? Alice is in many ways elegance, right? And the main character is brutality. It's sort of masculine and feminine. The feminine is elegant and the masculine is brutal. And together you have something that is much more beautiful than just one thing on its own. So Alice, is meant to be this ideal that we fight for, that we strive for, right? And then the main character is meant to be the other side of that, is that to attain that ideal, you have to do horrible things. You have to, be intimate with the darkness and the vice and the degeneracy. If you don't know it, you're never going to be able to fight against it, right? And throughout history, you see this. I mean, even if you, you go to the great conquerors of history, horrible things. But if you are the Roman invading another territory, your territory is not being invaded precisely because you're strong enough to invade another territory. They who are offensive, who conquer, are able to preserve, the lives of their families. They're able to preserve those people's purity. So purity is an interesting concept, an interesting ideal, because a large part of purity is preserved by this almost impurity, this almost darkness, and that you need both sides of it. Alice is the pure. Also have the main character who, as sort of is revealed in the book, is willing to sacrifice to preserve that. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, I think we can touch on heroism for a bit, because in addition to beauty and purity, I think heroism and the call to be heroic is another major theme in this novel. So when the main character starts to get fit, he starts to train at the gym with Carter and Trent. He's also having these dreams at the same time where Prometheus is calling him to be heroic. He feels this urge inside of him to protect what is beautiful, aka protect Alice from the corruption of the city. He doesn't want her to become like these women at the nightclub, which he becomes a bouncer at. And so the novel, it's really about his internal battle, sort of, where he wants to be heroic and he wants to save Alice from the degeneracy that surrounds him, but he doesn't know how to do that. He knows he has to, and he knows that it involves great danger to do so, and that he could potentially die or go to jail for it, but he still feels drawn to that. So, the warrior philosopher, what are your views on heroism, and specifically the call to be heroic, even though it has severe, grave consequences if you fail?
Yeah, and before I get into that specifically, I think what's interesting too is how he treats the two different women in the story, and I sort of put that in on purpose. I think a lot of times men try to be heroes in situations where they should not be heroes. They try to be heroes for women who are perhaps undeserving of that heroism, right? And there's this sort of idea of the nice guy, right? And part of the reason I have the two different women is to show that you shouldn't be the nice guy either. You must be a good man, and a good man also means you know who to fight for and who not to fight for. And of course, so he has the sort of tryst with that other woman, right? And he sort of notes that he knows he shouldn't put effort into saving her. The effort goes towards Alice. And of course, there is some glimmer of hope to this woman, but like as a man, you should not, you should know your worth, and you should know what's worth fighting for. And a lot of it, that sort of dynamic was who to be heroic for, right? You have to be heroic for the right person. You can't be heroic for somebody who's not, who's essentially going to be I can't think of unfortunately I have to use some crass words, but a whore, essentially, right? You have to be heroic for somebody deserving of your heroism, which is why I sort of have that dynamic there, which I just wanted to mention. And in terms of heroism and things that are worth fighting for at the risk of danger, for one, I made the relationship with Alex not overtly an intimate one or romantically intimate. I did that on purpose. I didn't want to make it too obviously. There's suggestions of that, but I wanted it to be almost platonic in a way because I didn't want Alice just to represent, a love interest, whatever that he's being heroic for, but also resembles family, right? All types of family. It resembles, what you're willing to do for not just your wife, but your children and your extended family as well. So I didn't want to make it overtly like a sexual relationship the same way it was with the other woman, because I wanted it to represent something more than just that. But in terms of heroism, I believe heroism exists when you're trying to live authentically. And what I mean by that is me, for example, right? I could, if I really wanted to, I could get some cushy job somewhere, work as part of the machine, make lots of money, six figures, and live comfortably and live in a way where I'm able to access pleasures, and not just the cheap pleasures, right? Because it's important that I mention also that the rich people in this society, right, who just happened to be rich because whenever money lost value, they were the last ones that had money. So, they're somehow rich because now obviously in this society, no one's really working. Very few people are. But it's worth noting the rich people are able to afford these higher vices, as I put it in the book, and a lot of us could do that. Like, you and I'd like to, be so bold as to say we're smart individuals and we could get six-figure jobs and live very comfortable lifestyles. But we choose to do things that are not necessarily materially beneficial, but spiritually beneficial. You have your calling, I have my calling, and it's not to go work for the machine and make six figures, right? And, money's nice, obviously. You can do a lot of good things with money. There's that, line from Steve Irwin. He's like, I can't get enough money, because he wants to go and help the wildlife, restore the beauty of nature, which is a very noble thing. But we choose to do things that are difficult, but are good for our spirit, because we want to live authentically. I would not be living authentically if I got some cushy job for the machine making six figures a year, because I wouldn't be doing something I genuinely believed was right. So I think living heroically is living authentically. You can just blend into the machine the way that the woman that he has the sort of 1 or 2 night stand with, like she sort of says, the last thing to do for the doomed is enjoy the fruits of, I forget the exact quote. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I don't remember every line from the book I wrote, but she essentially says that, the last thing for the damned is just to enjoy the fruits of their own doom. That's living inauthentically. That's being aware. That's being smart, knowing you can change things, but choosing just to ride the waves and, live comfortably. And the main character wonders at first. He's like, could I do that? Right? Could I just be like this woman and just, I'm smarter and I'm above, the pettiness to some degree, but I'll just enjoy it anyway. And he chooses not to just enjoy it because he knows that's living inauthentically to his spirit. He knows there's something very wrong in this world, and that it's, sort of barreling towards death. Right? If you're trying to create total peace, total harmony, total lack of pain, right, then death is the only answer, and it's a cult of death. And a lot of religions are a cult of death. The sort of ascetic religions. This is Schopenhauerian view of life. Right? All life is horrible, but you'll receive the true life in the afterlife or whatever. Or trans ideology. Oh, you're in the wrong body. Once you cut off your dick and take hormones, you're going to be in the right body. Everything's going to be fine. It's all this rejection of what you have now for something better. When in large part, the real struggle, the real life, the real battle, the real war exist here and now, and that's where the beauty comes from. And he realizes this, and he realizes he can't just sit by because he wouldn't be living authentically with what he feels is right. So at risk of like the things you mentioned, potentially death or imprisonment or whatever, he sort of he revolts against the modern world, so to speak. And he decides to be heroic. And I think that's what we must be called to do. It would be easy to just ride the waves, work for the machine, make lots of money, but it's not right. And I will say this, some people play the system, which I think is incredibly important. And I encourage people to do this, play the system, become a politician, get a very, high ranking job, but don't do it for the material benefits. Do it so that we can take back these institutions and use them for good. So I'm not saying if you're becoming a financial banker, you're an asshole or whatever, but you need to have a spiritual reason for it. You shouldn't be doing it just, for all these petty material things. The heroic purpose is to strive for something more, strive for what is good, right? I don't mean good in the sort of, oh, good and evil, blah, blah. A lot of that's been subverted, as we both know, just read Nietzsche, guys. But good as in what makes you stronger, what makes you more beautiful. Beauty and power is my morality. And, the heroic journey is knowing this and choosing to do something about it, choosing to fight for beauty against the great ugliness. And that's what heroism, means not only to me, but also what I insert into the book as well.
So I think there are two things there that I want to dive a little deeper into. The first is when you were talking about playing the system. And I actually have a quote here. It's from Prometheus talking to the narrator on page 64. Prometheus tells the narrator in this scene, "This is all well and good to live for oneself, but one who lives for himself must do so in a way that increases the world's beauty, that makes life richer, that in his individual heroism creates a vibrant world where others can look to him for inspiration. He who blazes forth a path for more heroes, who sets the stage for greater heights of beauty. This is the meaning of life. This is what has been lost." So that quote, I think, really captures that it's okay to sort of play the system, so long as you're not doing it just for purely self-serving, hedonistic motivations. As long as you're doing it for something higher. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing.
Oh, and the other thing you talked about that I want to touch on is with heroism, I think danger is a necessity. Obviously, we have to live authentically. We can't be living this simulated lifestyle of going to nightclubs and just fucking these, pardon my French, banging these love bots every night.
Right.
But there's nothing heroic about mediocrity either. You have to have a mission or a quest. For our narrator, this quest is protecting Alice from the corruption of the city and rescuing himself from that as well. And with this, there will come danger. And obviously, he could die. He could be locked away forever. But he knows that he has to do it because, destiny is calling him. So if you want to address either of those two things, feel free.
Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think what's interesting too is that he does recognize that there is something better in him when he has sexual relations with that other woman. I also make her name. I don't give her a name on purpose as well. He does recognize that there is something better in him actually having sex with a real woman than, doing the simulations or love bots or whatever. And it's true. It's better that you do have sex with a real woman than go and watch porn. But there is something more than that, of course, as well, right? There's degrees of getting closer to the ideal. And he realizes, essentially it's a higher vice, right? Like it's a higher form of hedonism, but it's still hedonism, right? And I think, I'm not a prude. I think you should enjoy life. You should seek euphoria. But the problem is that in the past, euphoria came only with, like you say, danger, right? After the Roman conquers the Gaulish village, he can take back, his second, third, fourth wife or whatever. Or they were concubines. I believe in Roman society, they were officially monogamous. But, essentially concubines, right? That's a form of hedonism, but it came only through struggle and through the exercising and manifestation of will to power. Great things came to people only when you earned it. So you take the concept of Valhalla. The whole concept of Valhalla is that you fight a great battle and you literally probably die. And after, at the end of the day, you feast with the gods. But first you must fight and die. probably suffering great pain. But at the end of it, you do experience a hedonism. You feast. I'm sure there's, girls there or whatever. But you earned it. You did something for it, because that's how life was. As a man, plenty of men had like multiple wives, in days past, but they didn't just get that because, for no reasons, because they were the strongest men. They were able to fight for the tribe, make the tribe stronger. They were able to protect their women. They earned those things, and there's meaning in it. There's meaning in their euphoria. You think of Caesar or Alexander or whatever. They earned their euphoria. They fought great battles, and they increased the strength of either, for Alexander it was Greece, and for Macedon technically, and for Caesar it was Rome, right? Their euphoria, their ecstasy was tied to something real. And Nietzsche talks about this as well, with the spiritualization of pleasure, right? There's nothing wrong with pleasure, but it must have a greater purpose. It must be tied to will to power. If it's just, freaking, banging a love bot, like a literal love bot, which is happening already now, unfortunately, which is disgusting. If it's literally just that, it means nothing. But if you have just conquered, Persia, and all of a sudden you inherit the concubines of Darius III, and now they're your concubines, his daughter has joined your harem or whatever, that's tied to will to power, right? That is a form of hedonism, but it's not at the same time. It's not this sort of disgusting, degenerate shit we see today, which has nothing to do with will to power, which has nothing to do with beauty, nothing to do with struggle, nothing to do with the forces of life and death the way it was in the past. So I hope that answers your question.
No, that's a very great response. And while we're on the topic of heroism, one thing that I think we should take notice of is that the greatness of a hero is directly proportional to the power of his opposition. So a hero who conquers like just an anthill is not the same as a hero who climbs a mountain to slay the dragon. And I think still sticking with that page 64, which there are a lot of good quotes from, the narrator knows what he has to do. He feels called to his destiny, but he's afraid that all hope is lost. He's very black-pilled in this scene. And so he's talking to Prometheus, and he asks him, "What can we do? Is all hope lost?" And then Prometheus answers him, so long as we wonder if there is hope, hope still lives. Like a dim flame, it requires only fuel to become a raging fire." And I think I really like this passage, because on my channel, I always try to discourage blackpilling whenever I see it. Sometimes I feel blackpilled myself, but I never go out and I never post those feelings, because if you want to be heroic, you can't be blackpilled. You have to overcome that inner, you have to overcome your inner hopelessness and your inner nihilism, and exert your will to power. So what do you think about this idea of overcoming hopelessness and hope always existing? Because even though the narrator lives in this awful society, he's one man, like he says, against an entire city that's degenerate, but he still tries to pursue his mission. So what do you think of this idea, and what would you say to people who may look at the current state of the world and feel hopeless and black-pilled?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we blackpill is because people just, they walk like the sleepwalkers in the story. They just walk towards their coded objective. They do their job, their slop job. They eat their slop food. They go home to their family, and families are a beautiful thing, but these families have turned to slop too. They feed their kids junk food, and they become fat and unhealthy, right? Everything's just become slop. But the reason why is because most people just follow the herd. That's just the nature of human beings. And the reason why is because life has always been dictated by a very select few individuals in actual society. Even if we go back to, most of human history, the ruling caste made up maybe 10% of the population, sometimes more, depending on which, civilization we're looking at. But the ruling elite made up a very small portion of society, and they were the ones who did the conquest. They were the ones who shifted history, who moved history. They were the movers of history. So it takes a very few amount of people to really start a sort of spiritual revolution. And I mean, this is true countless times throughout human history. But because people are herd animals, it's also easier than we think to push the herd in the right directions. We think everything is hopeless, right? But at the same time, I mean, just look at the 20th century, right? For good or bad, both with fascism and communism, whatever, right? And obviously, take someone like Mussolini, for instance, right? He was able to inspire the people to march upon Rome, and he inspired them not with a huge army behind his back, but as they marched towards Rome, they got more people to follow him, right? And he started with a very small, I believe I forget the original number that he had, but it started with guys like Italo Balbo, for instance, who was one of his major early supporters. But people joined him on the march to Rome, and this was largely the inspiration for the beer hall putsch. Obviously, it was unsuccessful because I believe was it Commissar Carr notified the local police or whatever. But you see that a lot of these revolutions, right? These spiritual revolutions start with very few amount of people, and more people join in because people want to be led ultimately, right? But this could also be a very bad thing, right? You look at the Bolshevik Revolution. You have the Tsar, the nobility, and all the resentment towards them is fueled by the Bolsheviks, right? And the Bolsheviks are able to get all these peasants to go at the Tsar and topple him, and eventually, literally murder the entire noble family, which is an incredible travesty. So it's very easy, for good or bad, to reorient the masses in a specific direction. So when you're blackpilling, you blackpill probably because you think no one cares anymore, right? Nobody cares. Everyone just is a sleepwalker. But at the same time, because they're easily subverted by the current system, they can also be led towards the good. It's so that's why I never lose hope, because nothing is ever really set in stone. And even if there is no hope, there's that great quote from Spangler, who a lot of people will consider a great black pillar. I don't consider him a black pillar. See, when he talks about the decline of the West, he's merely talking about one form of the West, the Faustian West. Because before the Faustian West, you had antiquity, and Rome was the height of antiquity. Rome fell, but then something else came about. Maybe whatever, the British Empire is essentially fallen, but that doesn't mean that somebody else isn't going to come and take their place. Who knows who it might be. So you might think all is lost, but like a phoenix, something rises from the ashes. And even if there is no hope, but that's never the case. Even if there is no hope, and Spangler says you must be like the guard at Pompeii, the Roman guard at Pompeii who never fled from his post. That is greatness, right? You must always fight till the end, even if there is no hope, because what's the alternative, right? Nietzsche talks about noble peoples. Noble peoples either live free or die fighting for their freedom. You choose not to live in chains. And of course, to some degree, if you ever read the Count of Monte Cristo, sometimes accepting temporary slavery to get your revenge in the future is also important. So I'm not saying you should always fight to the death. Sometimes you have to accept being a prisoner temporarily, so you can eventually get back at your enemies. But never stop fighting, ultimately, right? Never stop fighting. Whether it means certain death, never stop fighting. Whether it means you have to live in a prison for 20 years until you can get out and wreak your revenge on your enemies, never give up, never give in. Because what's the point, right? This sounds cliche, but you're given one life, right? You're given one life here. And are you going to, spend it being a bitch? Are you going to spend it being life's bitch, or are you going to impregnate life? I say impregnate life. I say be the master. Let the world around you be shifted by you. Even as a prisoner, you can be a master. Even as a prisoner, you can reject slavery, so long as that your spirit is free. In the Mishima biopic, he says, do not fear the death of the body, but of the spirit, right? We can literally be chained like Prometheus was until Hercules freed him and have our insides ripped out. But so long as you hold the kindling of fire inside, even if you die, your spirit rises and you inspire more people in the future. So just, ultimately, there's no point to black pill, right? You should be strategic, right? If you see, for example, it could be something as simple as working out. If you see one workout is not working, your workout plan's not working, you should obviously pick a new workout plan, but it doesn't mean you stop working out entirely. You shift directions, you shift strategy, and you come back at it. And this applies for a lot of things in life.
Sorry, I was muted there.
No
I
worries.
really want to. I want to talk about optimism because I think that's something sorely missing from the dissident right. It's easy to get black-pilled because, first off, it's easy to see history as a narrative. And in the 1940s, obviously, we were kind of in that second act where everything goes wrong, kind of like how in Revenge of the Sith, you had Order 66. Well, in the 1940s, the people who wanted to create a pure society, a beautiful society, people like the National Socialists and like Mussolini in Italy, they were unfortunately defeated by red subversion and, I hate to say it, but my country in Britain. But it's very easy to look at that and feel black-pilled, but we can't do that. History is not over, first of all. It never is. As long as there's anyone who still holds that fire within them, history is not over. And change is the only constant throughout history. This is a quote I'm very fond of. It comes from 40K, but everything is always in a state of change. We live in a degenerate society right now, but it's not going to stay like that forever. I mean, we could all die, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think there will be an elite, organized minority of the Ubermensch in our society, and they will be the ones who bring about a new golden age. I'm big on cyclical time. So I do have more topics I want to discuss, but do you want to talk about time being cyclical? Because I think this is a point we probably share.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And, this is a very Nietzschean concept, which is why I never believe in total perfection. I believe in the pursuit of perfection, right? Life is, this is something Lance's Legion likes to say. He says, life is like building a sandcastle on the beach. You build a beautiful sandcastle and the waves come and they destroy the sandcastle. But what do? You build another sandcastle, right? And, I think what's interesting about the potential for the future is, you never reach an end of history, but we are reaching the point of singularity. And I think, we're at a point where we have to win, because once singularity takes place, essentially when humans' technological process gets to the point where we essentially can become gods, we have to win, right? So I do think, I do believe in a cyclical view of history, but I also believe that we live in a unique period of time where history won't end, but whoever is in power at the point before singularity is probably going to largely dictate the rest of history. And to me, I think it's interesting that most cultures have this great battle at the end, right? For the Christians, it's the raptures. For Norse pagans, it's Ragnarok. This great spiritual battle, I think it represents singularity. It represents a point where whoever wins becomes the gods, essentially, or dictates the future. And of course, everybody believes they're going to win. But I don't think victory is guaranteed. If you guarantee victory, then you get complacent. You must live as if victory is not guaranteed, but that we're fighting for victory. So I absolutely believe history is cyclical, but I also believe that, we're at a point in human advancement where we are reaching a threshold that could dictate potentially the rest of human history. So I think that makes fighting as hard as possible even more important and even more necessary. But history is cyclical, and I think that the meta of time is cyclical. A lot of people, when you talk about time in actuality, in physics is literally just a different form of energy, right? It's a form of energy, but the meta of time, that beyond energy, is absolutely cyclical. If you I think what's interesting, this is getting a little bit sciencey, but if you think about the theist and the reductionist position is that energy is the first form, right? The first form which gives birth to all the other forms, right? Energy gives time comes from energy, space comes from energy, mass comes from energy, etc. But they don't account for what comes before energy. The same way that the theist position is that you have God, but nothing comes before God. God begins. I personally, I'm not sure specifically what your views are on this, but my view of metaphysics and physics in general is that the cyclical nature of life is precisely why we exist in the first place. I believe that the meta of time is an ever expanding circle, right? And you have a quote unquote beginning, but the beginning exists because at the end of the circle, you have a line feeding into it. But I believe that line is constantly expanding. And that's a topic for another conversation. I don't want it to dominate this one. But yeah, I mean, I think the circle is a metaphysical thing when you think about it. I mean, as a concept, right? This thing having an infinite amount of points, essentially, right? Because there is no point to a circle. There is something spiritual about that. There's something that we can't fathom. And I think that there's a lot that can be learned from the circle. Maybe this sounds a little bit esoteric schizo, but I had to mention it.
No, I actually kind of want to talk about metaphysics for a bit, because the narrator throughout the story of this book, he feels like destiny is calling him to revolt against this degenerate society, the corruption of the city. He feels like it is his destiny to do this. And I think that poses an interesting question, because to me, if you believe in destiny, that also means you subscribe to determinism. And I want to talk about determinism for a bit here. Do you think that everything is determined and that there can only be one outcome for how things turn out? Or do you think that there are many different possible outcomes and it's contingent upon our choice?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, right? Because, I guess the simplest thing would be, I don't know for sure. I absolutely believe we have free will from our perspective now, right? But so from my perspective now, I absolutely have free will. Life is essentially, you have all these probabilities about choices you might make. It could be as simple as, there was a 90% chance I was going to have steak for dinner, and then I had, salmon instead. Life is this wide range of possibilities, I believe, from the position we are now. The determinist position, and just a sort of example that most people will be familiar with is, the sort of Calvinist position that, you're either going to go to hell or not, predeterminism. That idea comes from this idea that the Christian God is all knowing, right? And even from a sort of view of cyclicalness, in a sense, right, the future both exists and doesn't exist. It both has happened and hasn't happened in a sense. But from our perspective now, right, because we don't have access to the future, we absolutely do have free will. So I guess to simplify is, I don't know for sure, because it's something that I can't quite wrap my head around, because I had this view of metaphysics where because the beginning of time, quote unquote, exists, something had to feed into it. I don't believe you can just have a start. Like I said, I believe the circle is this sort of spiritual thing. And I think it accounts for a lot of what we wonder about. So I don't know for sure. I mean, to some degree, I do have free will. But if there is no distinction between the past, present, and future, and if the future exists, then does that mean the present is already dictated? It's hard to explain. But all that to say, I do still believe in free will. Like I said, it's hard to say, because let's say, for example, this is just a hypothetical. If you were to transport your consciousness back to an hour ago, right? And before you go back an hour, you made all those decisions on your own, but you go back and you're observing the decisions you make in that next hour. You sort of see that as a predeterminism, right? Because you're looking at it from the perspective of the future. So I guess what I'm saying is, right now we absolutely do have free will, but I also it's hard for me to quite understand how the meta of time works and how past, present, and future really exist in whatever capacity or form. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but live like you have free will. Live like your destiny is formed by yourself. I do believe that. right? I do believe that you dictate your destiny. I don't believe your destiny is dictated by an all-powerful being. I believe that we become the all-powerful beings in the future. We become gods in the future. And because we become gods in the future, those gods have always existed in a sense. I talk about this in the book as well, the idea of potential, right? Potentiality is an existence. It is a pre-existence, but it is also an existence in its own right. So I know it's kind of confusing and not a clear answer, but I don't have a clear answer for that. But you live life like you control your destiny. And ultimately, I think you do control your destiny and you do dictate where you go forward. I don't believe somebody else decides that for you. But as for predeterminism and getting into semantics, with my view, my sort of meta view of time, right? Not time like energy, but like time in this sort of meta view. It's hard to say, if the future and present and past are indistinguishable, does that mean that existence deterministic? It's hard to say. But like I said, I don't have a clear answer, but I do believe we're in charge of our destiny, and I believe our destiny is to become gods essentially. And it's not somebody else giving us our prophecies. The Jungian dream is, your dreams aren't given to you. They come from within. Your destiny comes from within. Prometheus is within you. You are Prometheus, and Prometheus is you to some extent, but Prometheus is also all these other people who are striving. And Dr. Jason Georgiani sort of talks about this with the term egregore, which is almost like an archetype, right? And this archetype, this egregore, is almost this living entity, even though it doesn't exist in a physical form. The manifestations of all our collective wills sort of give birth to the spiritual entity. So yeah, I know it's super long-winded and probably a little bit contrived, but I don't have a clear answer. So I have to kind of put all these pieces together, and I'm still figuring it out as I go along as well.
No, that's a perfectly fine answer. I kind of put you on the spot asking that question. I would very much caution people against believing in immutable fate, because if once you do that, the destiny that you don't want to happen becomes your destiny. You have to believe that you have free will, even if we don't have free will, which I don't think is the case for the record. But even if that's true, you can't live that way, because then you're only dooming yourself to the outcome that you don't want. So that's all I would say on that topic. I
agree with you completely.
Yeah. Oh, good. I may write a Substack article or something about destiny, because I've been having a lot of metaphysical thoughts about that, and I don't have a strong position yet. Yeah. But bringing this back to the book, let's fast forward to the ending of the book. So I want to pick up at the scene where he's getting attacked in the club by those people, and they're wailing on Alice, and then he's just filled with rage. And even though he's wounded, he knocks them all out, and he might even have killed some of them. It's not exactly clear. And I want to discuss the ending, because it seems like you made an artistic choice where you can interpret the ending in multiple ways. And I'm kind of curious as to what the author himself says is the canon ending of this book. So we can really just go wherever you want with this, starting from when Alice is in the hospital after this fight.
Yeah. So I guess what specific interpretations did you think?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have explained this. So the way I read it is when he's talking to the people from the Rand Corporation, and it's revealed that Alice had died in a car crash 5 years ago, and he's been essentially living in the Matrix.
Yeah.
He has the opportunity to resume the simulation at a higher quality. He would forget that he ever met the people from the Rand Corporation, and he would get to live out a blissful life. But he's resistant to that. He's saying no the entire time. And then it sort of, he feels intense pain. He feels that the machine screaming. And then I think the last chapter is when it picks up. The city is crumbling all around him. But Carter, Alice, Trent, and the characters we've met, they're alive. And we start to see that the green is returning. Things are getting lush again. I interpreted this scene as he died and he's in a better afterlife now, where he can live out his Promethean values. But there's totally other interpretations one could take. One could say that the Rand Corporation was lying this entire time and that the world really is lush and green and he's been placed in this situation. Or you could even say, well, he could have been thrown back in the simulation, but the city around him, it's a new setting. He's becoming in charge of basically creating the setting of this, of his simulation. So those are just three examples. I'm sure the people reading, they could draw even more. So as the author, what would you say is the canon ending for this story?
So it's actually, I don't want to give away too much, just in case I ever decide to write a sequel. I have an idea for a sequel if I ever want to write one. So I don't want to give away too much, but I will say this. I will say, first of all, that the Rand Corporation was lying about Alice being in a past life. And I'll also say that the Rand Corporation, I'm trying to think what to divulge here. So yeah, first of all, the Alice story, there was, she did not exist in any past or whatever, right? That was a lie. I also say that he does not die in the end. Like I said, I don't want to divulge too much because I do have an idea of if I want to do a sequel, but so I want to leave it open-ended enough that there are multiple directions I can take it. But I do have a specific direction I want to take it. But also if I don't want to end up making a sequel, I don't want to give one specific ending. But I will
only diverge as much as you want. I'm not pressuring you into saying.
Oh no, yeah. I just trying to think what I can divulge without it ruining, where it could go or what it might just end up being. I will say this: everything that happened in this had a purpose. It was not purposeless, right? Everything that happened, there was a specific reason for it. And I will also say that this is, this spiritual transformation, it is real, right? But I'll also say that the fight may not be over, and that this book was meant to be read as a dream. It was meant to be quick and aesthetic and fast-paced and almost like a song, right? Or a poem. There's a sort of prose I was trying to insert into it. As you could see, it's a short book, right? It's barely a novel, right? It's a novel by 5,000 words. It was 45,000 words about total, so it's barely a novel. 40,000 is the minimum for a novel. So it was like a song in a way, and that was by design. And I will say this: if I did a sequel, it's going to be very long. It's going to be at least 500 pages. Because I think that, there are obviously lessons that people can learn from this book. And, one thing Lance and I talked about is a lot of people just don't have an attention span these days to read a long book. So this is a good book for somebody, I don't want to just help people that have already seen behind the veil. I want to help people that are just getting started looking behind the veil. And you have to give people baby steps. You have to give people little introductions. And I'll say maybe this book is the same way. And I'll let you interpret that the way you do. Like I said, I might come up with a sequel. But everything had a purpose. But like all things are difficult. Things are bad before they get better. That's the thing I said in the book. Things are not easy. You're not just going to wake up one day and all of a sudden you have the answers. So when you think about what happens in the book, you have to look at it and you think about the things that happen. Like I said, they all have a purpose. But if I do write a sequel, it's going to be much longer and it's going to have a reason too. It's going to have a purpose and it's going to be a lot more complex. And whatever, you can imagine what the sequel might be. I don't want to say what direction it's going to take because you can interpret it lots of different ways. Like you said, you could interpret it as he's still in the simulation. You could interpret it as he actually won, and a sequel could could consist of rebuilding, right? A sequel could consist of, if he is in an afterlife, who knows where that could go. So I won't say what direction it is, but that a sequel would consist of, let's say, for example, right? You watch. I mean, look. Here's the simplest example. My radical journey started when I started watching the History Channel, where I started watching certain edits. Right? That's an introduction. That's not going to tell you everything you need to know to quote unquote escape the matrix, right? You're not going to escape the matrix from even one book or a movie or a song. It takes a lot more than that. And this is just one short novel. The actual transformation is a lot harder. It's not easy. And that, all that's by design in the book and whatnot. So yeah, but that's all I want to divulge, not because I want to be secretive or anything, but because I think that the way I could take the story and the way that I want to take the story, if I do make a sequel, can be very powerful, profound, and people will understand why I did what I did, if that makes sense. Like, it has a very important purpose for me not divulging it right now. And like I said, if I don't end up writing a sequel, I especially, even more important, that I don't tell you the canon ending. So then, if it's only going to be one book, then I think people do like to sort of imagine their own ending. And in that case, if I don't end up making a sequel, I'll say this is canon right here. If I don't make a sequel, then there is no canon ending. But if I make a sequel, there will be a canon ending. So that's my that's my political answer.
Well, you're the author, so you're totally free to answer that however you want to. Another topic I want to get into is the character of Carter, because on the surface, you may think that he's just this friend character. He's sort of like the mentor in the gym, but he also becomes the narrator's friend throughout the story. But I think Carter is a much more important character than that, because without him, the narrator never would have begun his fitness journey, and therefore he would have never started to embody these vitalistic Nietzschean ideas. And also, there were two scenes that actually made me laugh out loud while I was reading them, and one of them comes from Carter. The narrator is basically telling him, he's philosophizing with Carter, saying how bad the city is, and how he wonders if it could get any better. And then Carter's just like, this sounds kind of gay. That made me laugh. There was one other scene that also made me laugh out loud. But I think we should pay attention to Carter's character, because he's more than just this best friend archetype, and he's also more than a mentor archetype. He kind of is, in a way, is the impetus for the narrator's fitness journey. He's the one who threw him out of the bar. He's the one who taught him how to lift weights. He's the one who taught him how to train. And at the end, of course, he's one of the characters that survived. So Carter, I think, how should I phrase this? I think the lesson we can take away from Carter's character is the importance of having both a friend and a mentor in your life if you're going to embark on this Nietzschean vitalistic will to power, this quest to do those things. Mm-hmm. And you need a Carter figure in your life. I guess you could do this without one, but your journey would be much easier if you had one. And I'm sure you would agree with that, but feel free to explain any thoughts.
Yeah, I think, the main point of Carter was to show we are not alone. There are people like us, right? There are people who also have this inner will towards that something more. And more than that, also, like you said, Carter's the one who threw him out of the bar. Carter was showing him that there is still a natural order to things. And it was also to illustrate that, a lot of us are in the DR are quite egotistical. Like, let's not lie. And we should be, we're smart guys. We put a lot of work into trying to do what we're going to do. But sometimes I think it gets to the point where we probably think we're the best around. It's just not the case. There's always somebody smarter, stronger than us that can help us, right? That we can learn from. You never want to be the smartest person in the room. You never want to be the strongest person in the room, because you want to surround yourself by people who push you to do more. And Carter was meant to be that. Carter showed him, well, there is someone stronger than you. And he does have a lot that, you have to learn from. You have to surround yourself by those people, but shows him that he's not alone. And he, like you say, he's the one who literally, I mean, that is a turning point in the book where he gets in that fight, because right before that scene, he talks about the old lion and the young lion, and that's to illustrate, this sort of that power comes from something real, right? There is an essence which makes up power, and of course, in this modern society, he doesn't understand. He's like, well, what makes the ultra rich the ultra rich? There's nothing really that makes them any better than the average person. Like I said, basically, this is sort of context of the story. The ultra rich are essentially anyone, let's say, for example, that quote unquote end of history happened in 10 years' time, right? And money didn't really have value anymore because you had enough abundance that people could get all the basic necessities for life. But you still have some rich people. The Elon Musks of the world are still going to be billionaires. Or maybe that's not a good example because he'd be at the top. Let's take a more middle level person. Take even Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump's very rich, but he's nowhere near as rich as Elon Musk. He's like a mid-level rich guy, or not really mid-level, but he has enough money that once the end of history happens, he can obviously afford better things than the other people can, even if everybody has access to abundance. But ultimately, his grandchild in this fictional setting, like if he inherited all that wealth, like, well, where's his power coming from, right? Where's this person's power coming from? Nowhere. And the main character sees that there is no order to power, and Carter shows him that there is order, right? That there can be beauty, that there can be strength. So you're absolutely correct. Carter is a very important character, and it's funny because, like I said, when I'm writing this, I'm not really thinking about why I write certain characters the way I do. It just happens, and I think like all the things you're explaining are absolutely the inspirations, but I actually haven't really thought of it. I just kind of rolled with it, right? I had the aesthetic vision, and I painted the aesthetic vision. But everything you're saying is absolutely correct, and you said it earlier in our conversation as well, where you were saying, well, what motivated you to write this? I didn't really think about any of this stuff. It just came about. But you're absolutely correct that, a lot of the importances behind these things are, as you say.
Well, I think that's a great answer. We'll do shilling in just a bit, but before we do that, the Warrior Philosopher, is there any topic that you would like to address now? Any questions that I may not have posed to you that you would like to answer? Feel free to take this conversation anywhere you want for the last bit of the show.
Yeah, well, I mean, I thought you had great questions. It made me think a little bit because, like I said, I didn't really have a clear intention behind everything I did, and I think it's good that way. Sometimes you just have to let your hand go where it is. Like if you're a painter, right? You just let the hand paint. You don't necessarily need to plan out the final piece, but everything that you mentioned was absolutely an inspiration for all those little things that we discussed. And it's actually interesting for me to hear it from somebody else because, like I said, I didn't really think about these things super deeply, but I absolutely felt them, right, subconsciously. So you pretty much hit all the main points that I could think of. If there's one thing that I would bring up specifically, it's the character of the unnamed woman, right? And I think like what I was trying to write in there, is that there is absolutely this terrible sort of malaise in the youth today, or not malaise, but ignorance towards higher pursuits, right? So people get stuck in all these different sort of things that weaken us, cheapen us, vices, right, corrupt us. But I thought it'd be interesting to sort of, because like especially the manosphere, I think they dilute a lot of these issues to the point where, like for example, I am obviously very critical of modern women, but I absolutely do not hate women. I love women. I think women are very important, especially in our mission, right? We can't do it without them. We're going to raise the future. You need good mothers. You need strong women, right? Noble women. So I absolutely, I think sometimes the manosphere sort of paints this hatred of women, which is not good. And I wanted to take a more nuanced approach to the issue, right? So with the character he sleeps with, right? She represents that sort of middle ground, or she's giving herself to the machine, even though she knows what it is, and that, you know, I guess that it was sort of I don't even know exactly what my intention was with there, but I do think there is something important in those exchanges and the conversations they have, and even she teaches him something, right? Because he realizes his he calls it his naive optimism, or whatever, and he also realizes the humanity of the people struggling. Because I didn't want to make her this just bimbo, stupid character. And there's plenty of those, right, in the book that we don't really talk to. But I wanted to make her this character of trying to understand the psychology of somebody going through this stuff. Because look, the system did not just fail us men, it failed women too. It failed women by, you take, the modern career, right? Like, these women aren't having, they're turning 35, 40, not having families. They were cheated out of that, right? I don't really blame women so much as I blame this corrupt and disgusting system, which has subverted everything. And I think what that character was supposed to be is sort of a reflection of that, that most of the people that we despise, and I don't mean the people at the top, but like the average people we deal with on a daily basis, are the way they are because of the people at the top that maligned they use their maligned influence to just destroy everything. So I just wanted to point that out specifically. I think the manosphere, it goes too far with these things, and we can't have a future unless we also have women that believe in the mission and believe in the ideal. And I wanted to create a more nuanced approach to the issue of women in modernity. I didn't want to just say, oh, these horrible hoes or whores or whatever. Like, obviously there's a lot of that, but it's not so simple.
Yeah, that's actually a very great point to bring up. I'm going to have this woman named Teresa Carraggio on my show, not next week, a few weeks down the line, but I'll definitely be asking her about womanhood, and particularly as a National Socialist woman in modern times. And I think we were talking earlier about how the opposite of beauty is defilement. I think women have been intentionally defiled by the bagel people, the long-nosed people, and it's frankly evil what's happened to our women, and we can't solely put the blame on them. There are other people behind this who are much more deserving of our scorn than women are. But that's all the questions I wanted to talk to you about. The Warrior Philosopher, do you have any projects or channels that you would like to shill?
Well, of course, I always, good friend of mine, and person I'm working on a lot of projects with is Lance's Legion. So I always shout him out, and I want to shout out our book company that I'm going to be a part of soon, DVX Publishing. It's the company that I'm publishing my book from, and of course, I put this invitation out to the world, right? Is if you have a good idea, right, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, definitely send it in to us, and we'll take a look. Because I think it's Jonathan Bowden that said a lot of the great leaders of the right came from the artist class, and we need more art. We need more right-wing oriented artists. The left has stolen art for the past 40 years because conservatards were stupid to give up art to them, because they.
I can certainly think of one good leader who was an artist.
Well, I mean, no, but even beyond that, like, I mean, it goes so much further. Gabriele D'Annunzio, Yukio Mishima, right? I mean, Mussolini was sort of an artist. He was a journalist. I guess this kind of counts. No, but there's like so many artists, besides, I'm sure, obviously, certain artists is the most famous, but no, but, that's how it used to be though, right? All these artists, all these right-wing leaders were artists. It needs to be that way again. Conservatards allowed the left, the communists, to take over art because of this false masculinity, or it's faggy, or it's gay. That's the stupidest thing ever. You know, I hate this sort of cheap masculinity, which led to that. And what did it lead to? It led to the fucking theater kids, you know, taking over the government. I want fascist theater kids, you know. Actually, of course I'm not a fascist, guys. I'm not a fascist, but I want, let's say, right-wing theater kids. You know, fuck it, fascist theater kids. You know, you know, hey, I send my heart out to all of you. No, but seriously though, you know, I'm memeing a little bit, but you know, we need more right-wing. I think theater is a great thing. I tried to fucking do theater, but of course the politics, you know, they don't want a guy like me because I wasn't, you know, I didn't have pronouns when I introduced myself. But like, we need more right-wing people in theater, in film, and art. I want more of that. I want movies to be made that have a right-wing orientation. Every single movie today is so stupid. I mean, have you ever seen Inglourious Bastards? That's the worst slop ever. Think about every single aspect. Every single aspect of that movie is demoralizing, right? It's even to the, you know, I don't want to get into details on YouTube, but shit like that. I mean, this is like, that's the state of cinema. You have all these demoralizing things that are trying to push specific narratives. The worst, all right, really quick, because I don't want to take up too much time. The worst example of this, if you want to watch a really fucked movie, watch the movie Stuck in Love. All three of the main characters in this story are essentially being cucked. Like, not literally cucked, but essentially cucked. And they try to paint this as like, oh, this is the good, sensitive guy, blah, blah. All cinema is subversive, pretty much. There's very few cinema that's very good. And even the cinema that's good, it's because they pretended to be satire, like Fight Club, for instance. Like, oh, you know, we're actually making fun of it. They weren't really. But, you know, oh, my media literacy leftist bullshit. Anyway, you know, let's bring back right-wing art is essentially what I'm saying. And I honestly, that's right, DVX, you know, send us your ideas, send us your queries. We'll take a look at them. Hopefully put out some more original content, because so far it's just Lance and I that have published our original content through the book publishing company. But besides that, you know, the book's coming out tomorrow. I'm going to send Sigmar a link to the pre-order if you want to get the ebook, but the physical copy, unfortunately, you can't do a pre-order for ebook on Amazon KDP. So the physical copy will be available tomorrow, but I'll send Sigmar the link to the ebook to share with y'all just in case. So yeah, definitely buy the book tomorrow. You know, check out DVX Publishing. Send us your queries for anything, and just, you know, get better, work out, read books, get jacked, you know, meet good women, and make lots of strong babies, and yeah, just, you know, become virile Nietzschean chads and eat raw meat or some shit.
Well, that's a great way to end it. I'll be sure to put both those links in the description once I get it. This is coming out, obviously, the night of February 26th. By the time you're watching this, it'll probably be long past that date, and I'll have the link to purchase the book in the description. So thank you so much, The Warrior Philosopher, for coming on. This has been a really terrific show. We discussed a wide range of topics, and I think it was very fruitful for the audience, and it gives them a good taste of what the book is about. So with that, I would like to thank you for coming on. I'd like to thank the audience for listening, and we will see you all next time.